All right, everyone, we're going to get started. Let me move my face here just a little bit so you can see this. So this is our weekly Q&A session for March 5th, 2020. I actually just have one question that was submitted today, and then I would like to share a few of the highlights from the Nutritional Therapy Association conference that I attended this past week. So just a few lessons learned there. So hopefully this will be useful for everybody who watches this, not just the people who had specific questions, as we typically have. So anyway, let's get to that question. Let me see if I can, yeah, there we go. All right, so, whoops, let me see if I can make this fit here. I'm gonna move my face down here. So this question, I paraphrased this. This was regarding an 18-year-old boy. The 18-year-old boy's mother wrote me an email with a lot of information in it, so I'm not going to get into all the details here. But basically, there's an 18-year-old boy who has ulcerative colitis. He was recently hospitalized with some infections, C. diff and E. coli, and hopefully those have been resolved. And he's on high doses of prednisone because he's been in a bad flare, and he's doing AIP. His mom's doing everything she can. But he really probably needs more carbohydrates. He's hungry all the time because, the high dose of prednisone will do that. She's also concerned about his vegetable variety. She said he's only tolerating sweet potatoes, carrots, parsnips, zucchini, and squash, all of those cooked down to a very soft state. So she wrote to me asking if I had any feedback, and I have a few ideas. First of all, you may not really need a greater vegetable variety right now. This is actually pretty good. I think that it's a good starting place anyway. I mean, I'm seeing that there's not a lot of green vegetables in here, but if he's managing all of this, cooked down really soft, I bet he actually would be okay with more cooked and pureed foods like broccoli. Absolutely not raw broccoli, of course. And probably not even just cooked whole, but if you wanted to puree it into a soup and mix it, maybe combine it with some squash, make it in bone broth, make it a really delicious soup. He probably could tolerate that given what I'm seeing here that he's tolerating. So I think you can explore adding a lot more vegetables into whatever purees you might be doing. Soups are great for that. Cooking things until they're just kind of falling apart. Even the green leafy vegetables. So again, we don't want them to just be eating kale straight up, but if you did like even juicing kale or smoothies with kale or any other greens, I think that probably would help get just that extra nutrient variety in. So that'd be my suggestion. And again, I don't know all the details, but I think I'd start by just reassuring you that this is actually a pretty decent variety. We've hit a lot of the basics here. You could also be looking at some of the other root vegetables because they tend to be pretty well digested when they're really well cooked. So beets could be an addition in here. I would get both, all the colors of beets you can find, cook them, turn them into a soup, turn them into something like, a hummus type thing if you'd prefer that. Beets, I said beets, turnips even, again, cooked, really well cooked. Some of the tropical root vegetables might possibly work, and they'd be high in carbohydrates. So cassava, taro, maybe plantains. And then of course, we also want to just be thinking about carbohydrates in general, giving him more food that has, good calories. So we might also be looking at fruit. Let's not assume that fruit is no good, because it is good. There's a lot of nutrients in fruit, and if he can tolerate it, you want to be mindful of the amount of sugar. If you're experiencing diarrhea, a lot of sugar will make that worse. But he might be okay with bananas. They can actually kind of firm things up. And if he is okay with bananas, then he's probably going to be okay with plantains also, which adds another option in there. And he probably needs to be eating more fat. So plantains that would be like cooked in coconut oil or something might be a good option if that works. And then there's reintroductions. So I understand, it doesn't sound like it's time for reintroductions to somebody who is not tolerating very many vegetables, who's just been in the hospital. But I think based on the little bit that I know, this is a case where it would be really wise to seriously consider reintroducing some white rice sooner rather than later. An 18-year-old needs a higher carbohydrate diet. When we're older, we can get away with being low carb, but young people can't. And 18-year-old boys are still kids. they're still growing. And then on top of that, he's got some serious, challenges here with digestion. So I would absolutely be starting him on some rice. The rice should be white rice. Don't let anybody tell you brown rice is healthier. That's going to be much harder for him to digest. So for sure, white rice. If he's going to be eating a lot of it, it's also important that you choose a rice that's not high in arsenic, which is one of those things that sounds really scary, but arsenic occurs. It's in our soil, it's natural. And some of the rice, it does have high levels in it, not a problem if you're eating it sparingly, but if you're going to be eating it multiple times a day, which is probably what I would consider for this young man, to give him as much rice as he wants. She said elsewhere in her email that he was raiding the refrigerator and needs more choices. So if he's tolerating rice, he's going to be free to eat as much of it as he wants. And so you'd want to choose a rice that's grown in a place that is known to not have a lot of arsenic in the water and the soil. And my first choice is always California. Lundberg is the company that makes a variety of rices, or grows and processes a variety of rices. They have organic as well. So you're going to minimize pesticides. You're going to minimize the heavy metals. And then I always suggest people cook their rice in bone broth, because it's a way to get even more of those nutrients in. So now, instead of it just being starch with no nutritional value, it at least has some. So you just would cook it like you do rice and water, but you're going to cook it with bone broth as the water instead. And so I would do that right away, and make sure that he's getting enough to eat, even if it means that he's not technically in the elimination phase of AIP. Rice is well tolerated by almost everybody I've ever had do that. So this is a common thing I would do with a client of mine who's described this way. I would say that, let's start you on rice. Let's see how that goes. And then, we can talk about, once you're feeling better, just getting stronger, getting your digestion kind of back on track, adding in more vegetables, different types of vegetables, different types of meat, fish, all of those things, liver. These are all things that are going to help him heal and get to the point of being able to tolerate more foods. So I hope that's helpful, and not just for the person who asked this question, but for anybody who's in this state, because we get kind of hung up on feeling like we need to do AIP like by the book. And in reality, there's a lot of times when by the book doesn't make any sense, and we have to adapt it and make it personalized. And so there's a lot more that I could say if this was a client of mine and we were working together. So if that's of interest to you, speaking to the family here, let me know, and we'll see if we can get you in my schedule. But to start with, I would do that. I would not worry too much about the vegetables. That's the main thing, because it looks like you're actually doing pretty good. But maybe you can add more pureed vegetables, and then add some rice in, and get him just so he's not hungry, and give him enough of the building blocks he needs to really, truly recover. So that was the only question that I got. Then the other thing I wanted to talk about was, let's see if I can get this to advance, the highlights, a couple highlights anyway, from the Nutritional Therapy Association annual conference. So NTA is the professional organization through which I did my studying and have continued to maintain my my network of colleagues and my professional development. And every year we have an annual conference. It's out in Portland generally, so I got to fly out there from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast, and get to connect with a lot of the people that I have learned from over the years, friends, colleagues, people I wish I could just tap into every day. So it's really exciting to be able to do this. And what I wanted to share with you all, let me get to the right page here, was just a little bit about the workshop that we had specifically relating to AIP. And then next week, when I do the next session, I'll share a few of the other highlights that I had from it. But I thought for today, I would just share some of the high level useful tidbits from the workshop on AIP. This was led by Angie Alt and Mickey Trescott. And they had us do some case studies where we kind of all got together and looked at some cases that they presented, talk about how we would approach them, learn from each other, ask each other questions. It was really, really beneficial. And I'm just so grateful that they organized this and that we got to collaborate with each other. Because as a lot of you know, I'm really big into collaborating with other coaches, but I usually do it online. So like the AIP Summit, some of the work, the cookbooks that I've put together. This though was in person. So I was really excited to be able to do that. We talked about in that workshop some of the lessons that those of us who've worked with a lot of clients, in particular what Angie and Mickey have seen, in terms of the different healing timelines that happen depending on what kind of a condition a person has. I mean, there's personal individual differences just at like the individual level, but there are also some commonalities we can see that are differences between different diagnoses. So, and these healing timelines vary. You know, we throw out numbers like 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, because our brain needs that. You know, we need to start with somewhere. But in reality, how long it is until you are ready to move on and to expand your diet and to really start feeling amazing is going to vary. So some of the trends that we've seen, first of all, I think all of the people watching this probably know I have Crohn's disease. That's an inflammatory bowel disease. The question we were just talking about was the other major inflammatory bowel disease, UC, ulcerative colitis. And I work with a lot of people who have that as a diagnosis, but not exclusively, of course. And what we have found in the study that was done into AIP in treating or working with people who are being treated for IBD as a complement to their other therapy, that they really, people do respond to it very quickly. That doesn't mean they immediately get to like full resolution of symptoms, but pretty fast when people go from the standard diet, whatever they were eating, to AIP, and they have a bowel disorder, they usually can tell pretty quickly, like within a couple of weeks or a couple of days even, that they're on the right track. So we see that quickly, and it makes sense because it's gut, you know. Some of the other conditions that take longer for anybody to even tell if it's working. So like one example, when we're talking about the endocrine system, you know, diseases that primarily affect that, like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease, anything affecting the thyroid. What we found, and I'm looking at my notes here, is that, you know, they will probably experience oftentimes initial changes in digestion improvement. If they'd had problems with their digestion, they might feel immediately some improvement in joint pain. They might feel improvement in brain fog pretty quickly. But the thyroid takes a long time to really start to change its functioning. And that's going to require a lot of healing. What we've learned from the study and from our experience is that people with these thyroid conditions sometimes start feeling worse. They feel better and then they start to feel worse. And that often happens if they are taking thyroid medication, hormone replacement medication, because what will happen over time is their overall body starts functioning better. They may need to adjust that amount of medication. Maybe their thyroid starts working better, or they lose weight, and so dosing needs to change, or their digestion, their absorption of their medicine has improved, so now they're absorbing more than they were before. So it's really important that anybody who is doing AIP and they have a diagnosis that affects these hormones, that they stay in contact with their doctor, and they even talk to their doctor ahead of time, probably not to get permission or anything. I mean, your doctor will be supportive if you tell them, I just want to do something that's going to, you know, some lifestyle changes, eat healthier, you know, try to see what I can do to get my body in order. They're going to be supportive of that, whether they know what AIP is or not. But let them know you're going to do this. And so you're expecting it to work. And that means you're going to need some probably more frequent monitoring. So if what they do right now is maybe draw your labs once every 3 months or every 6 months, you're going to want to have them draw more often. So maybe your doctor can put in just a standing order at the lab, so you can just go in and get it done, and then they can look at it and they can adjust the medications as you go. So that's a really important lesson learned from our experience working with people who are undergoing AIP for the hormones, you know, for thyroid in particular. We also know that it's really important that people with Hashimoto's don't go too low carbohydrate in their eating. So kind of this relates to the question that I was responding to before, and that is that, you know, we might change the reintroduction schedule for somebody if they're having trouble finding enough dense carbohydrates in their diet. They might do better having rice reintroduced earlier than somebody else would. So keep that in mind. Work with a coach if you're having trouble with that. Somebody like me or somebody else, you know, who's been trained here to help you, guide you through that reintroduction process. And of course, stay in touch with your doctor. That's something that's really important. Get those labs drawn. So that was our little like tidbit for people who are working with their endocrine system. People who have conditions that are kind of broadly categorized as connective tissue. So this would be rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, others as well. But what we learned there in this workshop was that they often get pretty fast improvement, sometimes again in a matter of just days. I mean, I've heard plenty of stories from people who are like, you know, I had rheumatoid arthritis and I went AIP and I immediately started to feel better. Again, not necessarily full resolution, but they were clearly eating something that was triggering the pain that then improved pretty quickly, and they knew they were on the right track. Nightshade sensitivity in this group is really common. We find that many people who have this as their primary diagnosis may be able to reintroduce potatoes, perhaps because those are actually the root and not the plant. It's like not the flowering part of the plant. Maybe that's why, especially if they peel them. But they oftentimes have a hard time with tomatoes and with the various peppers. Some peppers are better than others. And so I don't ever like to tell people that in the outset, like if you have this diagnosis, you'll never be able to reintroduce these things, because it's certainly not universally true. But it's something to just be kind of mindful of as you progress through the reintroduction schedule, the nightshades should definitely come later for a person who has a connective tissue type diagnosis. And then finally, the last thing I have notes on here about the healing timelines was we talked a little bit in this workshop about the conditions that relate specifically to the skin. And I actually had some firsthand experience with that because I worked with Angie in her, the study that was just, like the actual study was just completed, it hasn't been published yet, but the study group that was looking at AIP and psoriasis and eczema. And so we find that these conditions are often the slowest to respond to AIP, whereas, you know, we kind of went, and as I presented these in order of like, people with a bowel disease might feel great in a day or two, people with connective tissue diseases might feel great in a day or two, people with Hashimoto's might take a little bit longer, but they probably see something happening quickly. When your primary concern is the skin, it's going to take the longest because we heal from the inside out. You know, for something to get all the way out to the skin level and all those cells to turn over and to start to heal, it will take some time. And it might even, like, you know, as you're progressing through the initial part, actually seem like it's fluctuating as it had been before. So if you naturally had in the past, before you started the protocol, kind of like, you know, waves of it improving and getting better, that might continue for a while because it's just taking that, you know, it was progressing as it had been while your body is responding in all the other parts of it. So that makes sense. It doesn't mean AIP made it worse. It's just a coincidence that like that was going to happen anyway, and AIP hasn't caught up yet. So these are often our most difficult to deal with because it's hard to be patient. And we certainly don't want to tell anybody to just be patient forever, because there is a point where we want to troubleshoot. But keep in mind that even with conventional treatments, if you were to go to the doctor and they start talking to you about the medications that they can prescribe for these conditions, they're going to say the same thing. It's going to take, you know, I'll take this medication and come back and see me in 6 months, because it's going to take that long before we know if it's working or not. I'm just throwing that out. That's not always what they say, but like, you know, this is tough. I know. We found, and they talked about this in the workshop, I found this myself with my clients, is that stress seems especially significant for folks who have skin conditions that are autoimmune in nature. Their stress is a big deal for all of us, certainly is a trigger for everyone. But I think the condition itself adds stress to one's life because, you know, I mean, I totally get this. You know, having Crohn's disease has been in many ways easier than having another condition that one can have to show to the world. You know, I can smile and pretend my belly doesn't hurt and nobody knows, you know, and so there's stress, of course, involved in a flare up of Crohn's disease, just as there is with these other conditions we talked about, but I might be able to hide it. And that helps, I think, in a lot of ways, make it a little less stressful. So how do we manage that? How do we overcome that? It's not about removing stress from your life, but about learning better ways to manage it. So I think that I need to do an even better job when I work with clients who, no matter what diagnosis they have, of course, but particularly in this group, to really be making sure that we're talking about how are they managing stress? What are the tools that they're using? So whether that's, taking an art class or a meditation class, or having the spouse take the kids every morning so the other the other parent can have some time to themselves, or getting some assistance in cooking. So maybe if that's the key source of your stress, these are investments that are worth it for you to get a good start, because you could do everything right. I mean, this is like a meme on Instagram, right? You can do everything right. You can eat the food, you can drink the water, you can, check all those boxes off. But if your mind is still frazzled and you're feeling a lot of emotional distress, it's going to be extra challenging for all of those other steps that you're taking to actually work. So I think there's a case to be made too for somebody saying, you know what, if AIP is too stressful for me, if eating AIP adds more stress to my life, maybe that isn't where you go first as you're trying to get yourself kind of on the healing path. Maybe somebody who's feeling like they have a lot of stress in their life, they don't jump right into full AIP. Instead, they make a few changes and just maintain those for a while and see how much benefit they get from that. So those are the lessons that we learned. I was thinking I hadn't really worked out how much time this would take, but I figured it would fill up most of the time to just talk about the workshop. So what I will do is save my other highlights from the rest of the conference. Got some interesting things we learned about sleep. We learned about, we heard from Dr. Terry Walls about when keto is appropriate and when it's not. So I'll share a lot of those things a little bit here and there for the next couple of weeks. But I'm going to wrap up now. That takes us to about 20 minutes. And I think that's plenty for people to listen to me babble. Please give me feedback on this. I know most people are seeing these as recordings, which is great. I'm totally happy for that. But I'm seeing that, people are watching. And I'd love to hear back from you. Feel free to put a comment in this if you're seeing it on YouTube. And follow-up questions are also welcome. And I'd love to get more questions and more people participating, even maybe starting to do these more live, in another platform. I'm open to a lot of different ideas, but I love the chance to just get out and talk to people and answer your questions. So please help me answer your questions by asking them. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pause the sharing, and then I am going to stop the recording. So I'll see you all later.